Welcome back. This lecture is the first of two lectures on the hydrologic cycle. We aren't calling it the hydrosphere because it is really about both the ocean and the atmosphere. While all the spheres on Earth are linked and interact, the atmosphere and ocean interact quite a bit via exchanging and cycling of water, known as the hydrologic cycle, and that is what we are going to focus on in these two lectures. There are a lot of important reservoirs in the hydrosphere that we aren't going to get a chance to talk about. We are going to name them, but that's about it. This lecture, we're going to talk about how the properties of water are set up for the redistribution of water and heat throughout the Earth's system via the oceans and atmosphere. Then we will expand on the hydrologic cycle in the next lecture as well. So let's get started. Before we start, I want to remind you that life on Earth is water and carbon based. So the presence of liquid water is considered a defining factor for habitability. Water plays other key and important roles in the Earth system as well. For example, the oceans store a majority of the Earth's water and control and moderate its climate. Water also interacts with the atmosphere and transfers energy and matter. Air and water are really important geophysical fluids on Earth. They act like a human body's circulatory system on a planetary scale. Think about the way blood brings oxygen and nutrients and transport wastes away. Air and water connect all living things and all the different spheres of Earth together. Water is mostly in the hydrosphere and the atmosphere on Earth. Some water is also frozen, that's the cryosphere, which is a subset of the hydrosphere. Then there's some water in the biosphere and the geosphere as well. Other bodies in the solar system have water too. For example, Jupiter's moon Europa actually has liquid deposits. But Earth is fairly unique in the solar system in that it has liquid water, and a lot of it on its surface. Water can exist in all three states at or near Earth's surface: solid, which is ice, liquid, and gas, which is water vapor. The Earth doesn't just have water, it has a lot of water. About 71% of Earth is covered by it. You may have heard it called the blue planet in reference to all the water it has before. It may seem odd that it is called Earth, a term for land, when it is covered by more water than land. But it's important to remember that the water on Earth is a film on the surface of the planet. Actually, Earth has smaller amounts of water compared to other worlds. Here are two graphics that show the size of Earth versus other objects in our solar system next to a blue sphere that shows the volume of water that exists on that planet or moon. So for its size, Earth doesn't have very much water at all. It has a smaller volume than many other objects that are actually much smaller than Earth. But Earth is unique in the amount of liquid water it contains, which supports life. So where is Earth's water? Water comes in many different forms. Most of the water on Earth is saltwater in the ocean. The remaining water is freshwater. That freshwater is mostly on the surface, but some does exist as groundwater or soil moisture. Of the surface freshwater, most is in the cryosphere, meaning it exists as ice and glaciers. Then the rest is in freshwater lakes or rivers, some in saline lakes, and then some is in the atmosphere as water vapor. So we saw the different reservoirs on Earth now, and we also saw that water exists in all three states on Earth, liquid, gas, and solid, but most of the water on Earth is liquid, and most of it is salt water in the ocean. We know that water exists as three different phases, solid, liquid, and gas, and it can change phases if energy is absorbed or released. Ice can become liquid water, and liquid water can become water vapor when energy is absorbed. Conversely, water vapor can become liquid water, and liquid water can become ice when energy is released. It's also possible for ice to go straight to water vapor or water vapor to go straight to ice. The same rules of energy, either absorbed or released, apply depending on the direction. All of the water on Earth is linked through the hydrologic cycle. The hydrologic cycle involves the continuous circulation of water in the Earth-atmosphere system. An important note is that the hydrologic cycle is also known as the water cycle or the evaporation-condensation cycle. They're all synonyms, so depending on what source you're looking at, it may go by a different name. At its core, the water cycle is the motion of the water from the ground to the atmosphere and back again via phase changes. And you can see from the diagram that water evaporates either straight from a body of water or from plants, becoming water vapor, and then that water vapor condenses, becoming either liquid or solid forms. The cycle continues and actually moves water and heat all over the globe. The hydrologic cycle is actually driven by heat. Since heat drives the hydrologic cycle, let's talk more about heat and temperature, which are not actually the same thing. Heat is a form of energy. The transfer of heat leads to changes in temperature. It is measured in joules or calories, with a little c. Heat also depends on the size and thermal properties of an object. Temperature, on the other hand, is the average energy of motion of molecules in a substance, so heat is not the same as temperature. 1 calorie, that's 1 calorie with a little c, is the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So you should note that 1 calorie, denoted by that lowercase c, is not the same as a food calorie, which is denoted by a capital C. 1 food calorie is actually 1,000 little c calories. The next thing we should cover is water's specific heat capacity, because it is really important for the Earth system. Specific heat capacity, which is also called C, is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of a given substance by 1 Kelvin or degree Celsius. The diagram on the right shows the specific heat capacities for a range of substances. Water has a very high specific heat capacity, which means it can take in or lose a lot of heat without changing temperature very much. Liquid water has a specific heat capacity of 1 calorie per gram per Kelvin. This is due to the way that water molecules attract each other. The high specific heat capacity of water is important for habitability, as water's heat inertia means the oceans help to moderate climate. The oceans, which cover 71% of the planet, slowly absorb and release heat and prevent large temperature swings. A really good example of this that you may have experienced is how a coastal area doesn't get as hot during the day or as cold at night as an inland desert. The desert will experience much greater temperature extremes and shifts because it is so dry. Now let's talk about the latent heat of melting and the latent heat of vaporization. Water also has very high latent heat. This is the energy absorbed or released when undergoing a phase change. The latent heat of melting for water is 80 calories per gram, and the latent heat of vaporization or evaporation is 540 to 585 calories per gram. This allows the oceans to store, transport, and release enormous amounts of heat and influence and regulate climate, and thus habitability. The specific heat capacity and latent heat of water affects climate in predictable ways, and we can guess what precipitation and temperature patterns will look like based on latitude, which affects solar heating, and proximity to the ocean. The specific heat capacity and latent heat of water affects climate in predictable ways, and we can guess what precipitation and temperature patterns will look like based on latitude, which affects solar heating, and proximity to the ocean. With maritime climates, oceans moderate temperature changes from day to night and from season to season. With continental climates, there is a greater range of temperatures from day to night and from season to season. The graphic on the right shows the mechanisms behind the maritime and continental effects well. We've talked about specific heat capacity and latent heat. We have not gotten a chance to talk about ocean currents yet, but we will. For now, just know that it also contributes to the maritime and continental effects. To really demonstrate this concept, I have 2 climate graphs to illustrate this as well. The one on the left is a climate graph of Vancouver, Canada, and the one on the right is one of Saskatoon. These 2 locations are on a pretty similar latitude, so they will receive similar amounts of solar radiation. You can see that Vancouver has fairly high precipitation, shown in green, year-round. In red, we can see that there is a change in temperature over the course of the year, but it is fairly moderate. Now in Saskatoon, you can see that there isn't nearly as much precipitation. This is common for areas further away from large bodies of water, because the water that evaporated from the ocean has already rained out by the time the air mass gets to the inland area. There are definitely exceptions when mountain ranges or very specific latitudes are involved, but this is a good general rule. The climate graph for Saskatoon is also showing there is a much wider range in temperature over the course of the year. This is because Saskatoon is so much drier. Another factor that we have to talk about is air temperature and saturation. At any given temperature, air can only hold a given maximum amount of water vapor. If this is exceeded, then condensation happens. This will take the form of fog and clouds. The saturation amount of water vapor strongly depends on temperature, in an exponential way. The graph on the right shows that the maximum amount of water air can hold at any given temperature, and you can see that as temperature increases, the amount of water that the air can hold increases exponentially. A key point here is that if a given parcel of air is cooled, it can reach its saturation point and a cloud, rain, or snowfall will form. In nature, this cooling is often achieved via lifting or rising of air and adiabatic cooling via expansion. Note the link to the lapse rate here, which is important for cloud and rain formation and preventing loss of Earth's water to space. Here are two images that show global atmospheric water vapor. The one on the upper left is during the northern hemisphere's winter, and the one on the lower right is during the northern hemisphere's summer. Right off the bat, you can see that lower latitudes near the equator have the highest amounts of atmospheric water vapor. This is because those areas are warmer, and we now know that the ability of air to hold water vapor increases exponentially with increasing temperature. You will also probably notice that the zone where there is the most atmospheric water vapor follows the seasons. So in the northern hemisphere's winter, there is more water vapor in the southern hemisphere, because that's the southern hemisphere's summer. Then this band shifts slightly northward during the northern hemisphere's summer. Now let's talk about the process of how a cloud is formed. It all depends on the dew point temperature. The dew point temperature is the temperature at which an air mass, at constant pressure, achieves 100% relative humidity. This is the point at which the air mass cannot hold any more water in gas form. You can reach the dew point by decreasing temperature and/or decreasing pressure. Both of these factors decrease the ability of an air mass to hold water vapor, and it forces it to condense out. The graphic is showing how a cloud forms as air reaches a certain altitude that has certain temperature and pressure conditions. Of course, this relates to the adiabatic lapse rate, which is the rate at which the temperature of an air parcel changes in response to the compression or expansion associated with elevation change, under the assumption that the process is adiabatic, which means that no heat exchange occurs between the given air parcel and its surroundings. This is because cooler air has less capacity to hold water. Ascending moist air cools and condenses, causing rainfall. Dry descending air warms up, increasing its ability to hold water vapor and promotes evaporation. This will happen anywhere air ascends or descends, but is particularly visible on mountain ranges. This is known as the rain shadow effect. I have a really helpful diagram that shows the rain shadow effect on the right, and then an aerial view of Washington State where you can see a rain shadow in action across the entire state. The rain shadow effect causes dense vegetation on the ocean-influenced windward slope where lots of rain occurs, and then deserts on the dry leeward side. Atmospheric rivers are relatively long, narrow regions in the atmosphere that transport huge amounts of water vapor. They can carry more water than the Amazon River for thousands of miles. They are actually responsible for as much as 90% of global water vapor transport. There are some other names that are used, like tropical plumes, tropical connections, and so on, but we're going to stick with the term atmospheric river. They typically form in the tropics, where there's a lot of water vapor. These columns of vapor move with the weather. They're a little different, obviously, than actual rivers, terrestrial rivers, which flow downhill. Then, when atmospheric rivers make landfall, they often release this water vapor in the form of rain or snow, and mountains have a lot to do with that. This is a great graphic provided by NOAA that explains the process. The Pineapple Express is a strong atmospheric river that brings moisture from the tropics near Hawaii over the U.S. West Coast and Canada. This image of the Pineapple Express shows how long atmospheric rivers can be. A series of extremely severe storms were brought on by the 2014 Pineapple Express. This is a fairly rare occurrence for there to be severe storms associated with it. But while a specific atmospheric river is not a constant feature, atmospheric rivers in general are quite common. So let's get back to the hydrologic cycle, now that we know that energy is what controls the phase changes of water and that the high specific heat capacity of water means it will take a lot of energy to do this. We also know that water has a very high latent heat capacity that allows it to store, transport, and release enormous amounts of heat. Because of this, the hydrologic cycle transfers enormous amounts of energy from the ocean into the upper atmosphere, and it is extremely important in global climate formation and habitability. The heat from one area can be moved to other areas of the globe quite quickly. I really want to drive home the fact that the latent heat of evaporation of water affects climate via the hydrologic cycle, so I gave it its very own slide here. Where water evaporates, it takes heat from the environment, and where water condenses back into liquid, it releases that same heat into the environment. Because of this, equatorial areas are not as hot as they otherwise would be, and polar areas are not as cold. The map on the right is showing areas where heat is absorbed and areas where heat is released via the hydrologic cycle. This is the heat energy exchanged in the evaporation-condensation cycle, also known as the hydrologic cycle. This makes life possible on Earth, and it is also the reason why sweating cools you down. It is really uneven heating of the planet by the sun that is the ultimate cause of winds and ocean currents. This graph is showing sea surface temperatures, and you can see that low latitudes, areas near the equator, are much warmer than higher latitudes. The Earth system seeks to redistribute this heat through the hydrologic cycle, and winds and ocean currents are the way the Earth systems achieve this. The image on the left is showing why there is uneven heating on the Earth by the sun. At lower latitudes, solar rays come in from directly overhead, and there is more solar energy per unit area. Also, the solar radiation doesn't have to travel through as much atmosphere at lower latitudes. But at higher latitudes, the sun's rays come in at an angle, and because of that, they are spread out over a larger area, meaning they are less concentrated. They also have to travel through more of the Earth's atmosphere, and so have more opportunity to be reflected. This means that, on a planetary scale, there is a net surplus of energy near the equator and a net deficit near the poles. That is shown by the image on the right. Like I said, the Earth system seeks to redistribute this heat and does this by transferring water around the globe using surface currents in the ocean and water vapor in the atmosphere. This graph shows the heat transport by oceans versus the atmosphere for different latitudes in the northern hemisphere. You can see that the ocean is more important below 30 degrees north latitude, at which point the atmosphere moves more heat. There are some really vast or large-scale ocean currents and atmospheric wind systems that redistribute heat around the globe. These take heat away from low latitudes and towards higher latitudes. They also moderate and control climate globally and are thus very important for global habitability. Without them, we would have extreme heat and extreme cold. Here are the major ocean currents on Earth. You can see large circuits in each ocean basin. These are called gyres, and you can see warm water from the equator moves to higher latitudes on the eastern sides of continents. These are the western sides of ocean basins and are thus called western boundary currents. Then cold water from high latitudes travels to the equator on the western sides of continents. These are the eastern sides of ocean basins, and so they are called eastern boundary currents. We will talk about why the currents have these general rotation patterns next lecture. The uneven heating on Earth causes warm air to rise at the equator, setting up atmospheric convection cells. A convection cell in a room is shown on the left as an example. Warm air from a radiator rises and travels across the room. Eventually, it nears a cold window and transfers some of that heat. This cools the air off. These convection cells also lead to horizontal pressure differences. The areas with warm air that rise are less dense, and so high pressure, cold air, is going to rush in to take its place. This air gets heated and then rises. This process continues to cycle air through the cell and the room. On a planetary scale, which is shown on the right, this causes wind and atmospheric circulation, as water in the atmosphere redistributes uneven heating from the sun. Here's a view of the general circulation of the atmosphere. First off, note the large-scale convection cells, shown with the red and blue arrows. The warmest area is at the equator. Here, warm, moist air rises. Remember, hot air rises because it is less dense, and cools and condenses as pressure and temperature decrease as it goes up in the atmosphere. That is why it rains so much in the tropics. Cooler air comes in from higher latitudes to replace the warm air that rose up in the atmosphere. In the upper troposphere, the slightly less warm air, but still relatively warm air, mass from the equator moves to about 30 degrees north or south latitude, and then it descends. The dry air expands and heats up as it descends. Warmer air can hold more moisture, and so it sucks up any ambient moisture in the area. That is why there are so many deserts at 30 degrees north and south latitude. This process continues with mirrored convection cells moving heat and water around the globe and causing pressure changes. This also sets up surface winds, which you can see in green on the map on the right. For example, the trade winds travel toward the equator because air descends at 30 degrees north or south latitude and travels towards the equator. There are more caveats that we will discuss in the next lecture. I just want to hammer home the importance of Earth's air and water for habitability. Water in the air and oceans act as Earth's circulatory system, much like blood in animals. It is important for the redistribution of heat energy to moderate climate. It is also important because the oceans store vast amounts of heat energy and regulate climate. Finally, air and water are responsible for the redistribution, mixing, storage, and recycling of substances and materials globally. Remember that everything is recycled on Earth. Some important gases that are recycled are things like oxygen and CO2, but nutrients and all sorts of other materials are distributed through these media as well. All living organisms exchange gases with their environment and generally live within the Earth's geophysical fluids. Now, geophysical fluids are just naturally occurring fluids like lava and water and so on. That concludes the material for this lecture. Let's go through and review the main points. Water is an absolute prerequisite for habitability. Earth is unique in the solar system in that it has liquid water on its surface, but other bodies in the solar system have lots of water too. Most of Earth's water is stored in the oceans. Changing phases and/or temperature of water requires heat energy or releases heat energy, depending on the direction of the change. Water has a high specific heat capacity and latent heat of melting and evaporation. Cold air is able to hold much less water vapor than warmer air, hence cooling air causes condensation, cloud and fog formation, and precipitation. Cooling in nature often happens by lifting and adiabatic expansion. The hydrologic cycle, which is also known as the water cycle and the evaporation-condensation cycle on Earth, is driven by heat and transfers huge amounts of heat energy from tropical areas to higher latitudes, and it moderates climate on the planet. The oceans also moderate climate and are key for climate and habitability. Uneven heating on Earth ultimately causes atmospheric rivers, pressure differences, convection cells, and thus causes wind and atmospheric circulation to form. The atmosphere and ocean are the Earth's geophysical fluids and circulatory system, transporting and recycling materials and connecting all organisms globally. Thanks for sitting through the lecture. To test your learning, I suggest you review the material and make sure you can answer these questions.